Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 27, verse 4. Chapter 27, verse 4. This, of course, is the famous part of this parsha. Yitzchak calls in Esav, and he says, I don't know when I'm going to die, so get your weapons together and go hunt for me. And now in verse 4, V'aseh lima tamim kasher ahavti, make for me tasty food. V'avio li, and bring me the food, v'ochela, and I'll eat from it, bavur, so that my soul will bless you before I die. We've already discussed whether it be that he wants him to do a mitzvah before he gives him a bracha, whether it be that he wants to have a stronger emotional connection with him before he gives him a bracha. That's the idea of him bringing food. Okay. And Rivka hears about this, and Rivka knows V'rav Yavod Sa'ir. This was the prophecy that Rivka was given, or the message that Rivka was given at the beginning of this parsha, that the older child is supposed to serve the younger child, which means that it's not such a good idea for Yitzchak to give Esav the bracha, the special bracha. So she calls in Yaakov and she says, listen, here's what you're going to do. And she plots this whole idea that Yaakov should disguise himself as Esav, and then we know the story. Let's see the Ramban over here on Pasuk Dalet. What was Yitzchak's intention in this bracha? Says the Ramban. He wanted to bless Esav that he should receive the bracha of Avraham, lincholas haaretz, to be the heir to the land of Israel. V'liosu bal habris lelokim, and he, Esav, and his descendants should be the one to carry the covenant with God from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Ki hu ha-bechor. After all, Esav is the older one. Now, if they as a couple know this prophecy that the older one is supposed to serve the younger one, it's very difficult to understand why this special bracha is being given to the older one. So, says the Ramban, V'nireh, shelo higidelo Rivka me'olam hanavu asher amar Hashem lo v'rav Yavod Sa'ir. As I'm sure many of you surmised already, the Ramban says, it appears that Rivka never shared this matter with Yitzchak, never told him that she was informed that the older one would serve the younger one. This sounds like a bracha that's running counter to the plans. So why would you do something counter to the plans of God unless you didn't know about the plans of God? So now the obvious question now is, why didn't she tell her husband about this? This is a pretty important piece of information. Derech Musarut Tznius. So at the beginning, she didn't share it with him. It just seemed to be appropriate to not share it with him. Kiva-telech lidros Hashem, shalcha below Rishus Yitzchak. Doesn't say, the whole story at the beginning of this week's parashah, there was all this jostling within her womb. She was very unnerved by it. So she went to seek out God. And we have the famous idea, whether it be she went to pray to Hashem, whether it be she went to seek out Shem for guidance. But it doesn't say that she went to ask her husband what he thought the story was, or what he thought she should do. She went on her own. So now she gets this information. So it doesn't feel like it's such a nice thing to go back to Yitzchak and say, I'll tell you the right answer for the question that I didn't even pose to you. So she doesn't share it with him. Osha Amra, or we've actually seen this before, was similar. We've seen that she says to herself, I don't need to tell Yitzchak what God told Shem to tell me. Yitzchak is a greater prophet than Shem is. So if Shem knows it, Yitzchak certainly knows it. So I don't need to talk to him about it. It's known. So in the beginning, she didn't say it to him whether because she thought it was rude or whether she thought it was evident that he knew about it. The ata lo ratza leimor lo kachuga limies Hashem terim lidasi ki amra bi'avaso oso lo yivarich Yaakov v'yaniach hakol bidei shamayim. So why doesn't she come to him now? So now she hears that his plan is to bless Esav. So it's very obvious he doesn't know anything about this. So what's going to happen now if she goes into him and says, by the way, I want to tell you, all those years ago, I had a prophecy. And so at this point, he already has a plan to bless Esav. It's clear, as we were told in the Psukim, he has a great affection for Esav, a unique affection for Esav. And it would be a very painful thing for him to not give the bracha to Esav, and certainly to not give the bracha to Esav and give it to Yaakov instead. So she believes if she comes to him and says what she knows, his response will be, okay, you know what? No one's getting a bracha. I'm just not going to give anybody a bracha, and I'll just leave it up to God. And she didn't think that was good enough. She believes that the bracha is a powerful tool. She believes that the bracha is more powerful if it's given with full intent and love, etc. And she wants Yaakov to get this bracha. So she believes the only way Yaakov can get this bracha with Yitzchak wanting to give it is if he disguises himself as Esav. There is another possibility, says the Ramban, that really this wasn't such a wonderful plan that Rivka had, but this is all just God's plan. Sometimes Kadosh Baruch Hu puts ideas in people's heads. This doesn't mean he takes away free will, but it means we could only have free will if we understand the paths in front of us. So this chain of events makes it that both of them would receive a bracha. That's what ends up happening, and maybe that was God's will the whole time. So just an interesting Ramban to think about. Okay, let's now move on to verse 6. Rivka Amra Yaakov b'na lemor. So Rivka says to Yaakov, saying, Hine shamati asavicha medaber al Esav achicha lemor. Behold, I have heard your father speaking to Esav, your brother, saying as follows: Havia li tzayid, bring me game, v'aseli matamim ve'ochela, and bring me food, and I will partake of it. Va'avorecha lifnei Hashem lifnei Mosi. And I've heard Yitzchak tell Esav, I'll bless you before God, before my death. So now she says to him, here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Go, disguise yourself as Esav, etc. If you look at verse 4, which is the first pasuk we read this morning, it says in the second half of verse 4 that Yitzchak says to Esav, I want my soul to bless you. The end of verse 7, when Rivka is quoting Yitzchak, she says, I will bless you before God. He didn't say before God. Why does she include over here before God? So really interesting, Ramban on pasuk Zayin. Va'avorecha lifnei Hashem lifnei Mosi. Lo niskar b'chol ha'parsha lifnei Hashem. Nowhere else in this section, in the context of the bracha, does it say before God. Rak b'makom hazeh, just over here. Ki amru lo ima. What Rivka is telling Yaakov is as follows: Habracha lifnei Hashem tiyeh b'ruach hakodesh. This bracha in God's presence is going to be with divine inspiration. If Esav, your brother, is the recipient of this bracha, tiskayim bo uvizaro la'olam. This bracha will be impactful for him and his offspring. Ve'ein lecha amida lefanav, and you will not be able to stand before him. So it's not that. So what she's saying, says the Ramban, is this is not like a sweet little thing that Yitzchak is going to sit down with Esav and tell him some nice thoughts. This is a very powerful moment. It's Lifnei Hashem, and it's with divine inspiration. And you need this. This is essential that it be for you. And that says the Ramban is what she's saying to him, which of course is the explanation for why she tells him to take the extreme approach that she ends up advising him. Okay, let's hold on one second. Okay. Okay, let's see verse 12. So Yaakov says to Rivka, I don't think this is a good idea. My brother is a very hairy person, and I have smooth skin. Verse 12, maybe my father will feel me, and it'll be obvious that I'm not Esav, and he'll look at me as a trickster. If anything, I'll bring upon myself the curses of Yitzchak, my father, and not the blessings of Yitzchak, my father. Okay, so appearance is not much of a concern because Yitzchak is basically blind. Okay. Yaakov is worried about feel, and this is so, this is part of the plan, and don't worry, and she presents him in a way that he'll feel a certain way, but he leaves out what probably is the most obvious concern, which is voice, sound. Why isn't he worried about that? We didn't say anything about Yitzchak's hearing in this parsha. We said Yitzchak doesn't see well. So Ramban on Pasuk Yud Beis, Ulai Musheni Avi, Ein Atam Shi Musheu Lahakiro. So, first of all, the Ramban says it's not that he thinks his father is going to sit there and say, wait, before the bracha, I need to ascertain that you're really Esav. Let me feel your. That's not what he thinks is going to happen. Avol Amar Ulai Yikarev Osiel Atzmo Lenashekli. Maybe before the bracha, after the bracha, he'll bring me close to kiss me. Olasum Yado Al Ponai, maybe to show affection, he place his hand on my face. Kiderachibas Avo Beno is what, of course, is very normal for a parent for a child. The Yimtza B'misho Shani Chala. And as he feels me, it will be apparent that I'm not the hairy person his oldest son is. That's his concern, first of all. Now the Ramban says, Vani Toma, but I really am perplexed. Why is he not concerned that Yitzchak will understand it's not him because of the voices? People are recognizable by their voices. Basically, one could always pose the question when a couple is having relations, and if it's dark and there's no light, how's a person ever sure that they're with their spouse? So the assumption is this voice. There's people are talking to each other that they can recognize who the other is. We have no reason to believe Yitzchak wouldn't recognize the voice of his sons. So he says, maybe the brothers, they had similar voices. It's possible. It certainly happens. The Ramban just points out, Yitzchak is confused when Yaakov comes in, and he says, wow, that he feels like Esav, but his voice sounds like Yaakov. So how does that fit? Says the Ramban, there's a medrash that says that means his words sound like the way Yaakov would express himself. But the Ramban says maybe their voices actually sounded very, very similar, but what Yitzchak is saying is his word choice is a Yaakov kind of word choice. Oh, but maybe he was good at doing impersonations of his brother. Maybe you could make his voice sound like his brother's voice. There are people who know how to do that. So all these Rambans are interesting parts of the story. We discussed the Ramban this morning regarding why Rivka hadn't shared the prophecy with Yitzchak. We discussed why Rivka uses the word that Yitzchak is going to bless Esav before God. And we discussed now also why Yaakov wasn't worried that Yitzchak would recognize his voice, and through that understand that it wasn't Esav.